In this video, I'm going to be giving my thoughts on Godzilla vs. Kong. Now, for those worried about any kind of spoilers, it's going to be a largely spoiler-free review, as it's really easy to talk about this movie without giving out any major spoilers. So there you go. Now, Godzilla vs. Kong is what Legendary Pictures and Warner Brothers have been building towards ever since 2014's Godzilla, with their own cinematic universe known as the Monsterverse. Now, this universe has not been as successful as the Marvel Cinematic Universe or even the DC Extended Universe. The world building that they have done in Kong Skull Island and Godzilla King of the Monsters was cool enough, and the sheer spectacle of seeing Godzilla and Kong fight was reason enough to be excited, just because these versions of the characters were pretty badass in their respective films. Now, to set up my thoughts on this movie, what I thought about the previous films in the cinematic universe, the 3 movies prior, I thought 2014's Godzilla was actually a pretty boring movie, but the fight at the end at San Francisco was pretty badass. And I thought Kong Skull Island and Godzilla King of the Monsters were pretty good experiences for what they were. Kong Skull Island was definitely the better all-around movie, but I still had some fun with Godzilla King of the Monsters, despite some flaws with the human characters and the story overall. Now, with Godzilla vs. Kong, without giving out any major spoilers about the meat and bones of the plot, I'll just say that Godzilla is acting strange, and Monarch enlists the help of Kong to sort of even the odds with Godzilla, while a larger behind-the-scenes plot is going on. Now, with movies like this, it's a big waiting game, and I'm talking about movies where you're just waiting for that CGI to get on the screen. You know, movies like that are Transformers, Pacific Rim, natural disaster movies, and even movies in this Monsterverse, especially the Godzilla movies, where there is a little bit of a struggle to get that right amount of screen time of Godzilla versus the human screen time. So out of this movie doing that department, well, I'm going to get the human stuff out the way. Now, I'm just going to say that the human characters in this movie, they suck. You know, I never thought I'd say this, but I actually thought the humans were done way better in the previous movies. And it's not like they were done great in those movies, but they had a way better cast of characters and overall better storylines. I mean, the main human storyline in this one is just a cliche girl and a monster relationship, where this little girl from Skull Island has this relationship with Kong, which is really sort of the quote-unquote heart of the movie. And it's just meh, it's boring, it's whatever. It really kind of goes nowhere. The Stranger Things girl from the previous movie, Godzilla King of the Monsters, she actually had a decent story in that movie, but here it gets really sort of stripped down in this one. You can really get nothing from her. You really get nothing from the rest of the cast. The human characters in this one, as I said before, they really suck. The core plot of the movie also isn't very good. You know, actually, I thought through the first half of the movie, the main plot was pretty terrible. You know, it was just really kind of silly. It was really kind of like, really? This is the kind of journey we're going to go on? This is the reason for these two characters to sort of come together? I was just like, man, it had me really worried for the movie. Thankfully, things came together by the end to make it more satisfying for this plot that they did set up, just because the actual payoff for what they did set up was satisfying. But the journey to get there, especially in the first half, was not great. But then, obviously, there's your headliners, the God and the King. And what works in this movie's favor is that it doesn't take a whole lot of time to get to them. You know, the movie is only an hour and like 40 minutes. So that means you get a good ratio of monster and human screen time to where you're not waiting forever for the monsters to get to the screen. You know, you get a pretty good ratio of having at least one on the screen, or at least some kind of like CG goodness to look at. And what I'll say, one of the things that's most surprising about this movie when it comes to the story and the monsters is that you get a lot more Kong than you do Godzilla. You know, this movie is very much through the eyes of Kong for most of it, where he's the one that gets more of the hero treatment compared to Godzilla, whose role is very different in how he's treated in his previous 2 solo movies. This is very much a Kong movie through most of it, especially the middle. It's almost exclusively through the eyes of Kong. So for those who are big Godzilla fans, you don't really get a ton of him through the duration, like middle core of the movie, even though you will get him in sort of his sections where it's like, okay, Godzilla's being a badass. But like I said, his treatment is very different compared to how it was in those previous solo movies, where he really is the hero of like the whole world. Not so much the case in this one. Now, when you get to the thing that people want to see, the fights, I will say that the fights themselves are spectacular. You know, what the thing they do initially good is that they do a good job of playing upon the strengths of both of the characters. You know, with Godzilla, he's a lot more durable. His fire breath attack is obviously super devastating, and he's obviously going to thrive in a water environment. Then you have Kong, who's a lot more agile, he's quicker, and he can use actual weapons to his advantage. So those sort of strengths on the characters, you get to see them throughout the fights, you get to see how they play out, you get to see the weaknesses, and it's really cool how they give them like their own sort of like just due in those respective fights. In terms of how the fights look, they're just mind-blowing just to look at. You know, the sheer scale and destruction is just wow. You know, whether you're seeing this at home or whether you're seeing this in the theaters, you'll just be blown away by what they pull off. And I'm talking specifically more so about Godzilla and Kong sort of quote unquote final fight that you see, that whole sort of main section, their final fight. That is just amazing to look at. The camera angles that they show where Kong's just leaping from building to building and then Godzilla is unleashing his fire breath. It's just like crazy to look at. And then when the fight gets in close quarters and you see both of them are giving everything they have to get sort of the edge on each other, it's just like, man, those fights are what I love to see in a great movie fight between two titans, you know, and stuff like when you say like Captain America versus Iron Man or Batman versus Superman or Freddy versus Jason, you get the equivalent of that with this fight in this movie, but it's just taken to a whole nother level. Just because we've never seen a fight like this with this kind of scale between sort of two sort of movie heroes. It was just really just breathtaking to look at. And really sort of destruction that they leave with this fight, man, it makes the stuff in Godzilla 2014 look like a traffic light crash. The destruction at the end of this movie is just crazy when you look at it. I think the thing that's most surprising and most admirable about the whole fight is that there's actually a clear winner between the two. Usually with movies like this, where it's a big sort of versus movies, it's sort of a big sort of like cop out to say like, well, both of these heroes are sort of like on equal terms and we really don't want to say that one's better than the other one. Here, there's a clear winner between the two of them, which is pretty ballsy, but I like that because it makes it like there was an actual fight with actual stakes and made it see like, okay, this is what the end result of what you're going to get when these two titans sort of come together. By the end of the movie, without spoiling things, there was an additional kind of like force or element that came into the movie. With all these kind of versus movies, it's always something like that, an additional thing that comes in. And I will say, while it can initially come across as like silly, like really, I think in movies like this, you can't be afraid to go crazy. You got to go all out. And I think for what they did, it actually did work. And it did lead to a lot of sort of like fuck yeah moments in that final portion of the movie. So I would say overall, the final third of this movie is about like maybe like 35 minutes, 30 minutes, something like that. It definitely was spectacular. It will give you your money's worth or your time's worth. And that's where it definitely lived up to what a lot of people wanted to see. I will say that the movie itself, the actual ending, it did end kind of awkwardly. It ended really abruptly. Like, oh, really? That's it? I was just like, that was a really kind of poor decision, the way they ended the movie so abruptly. But overall, they definitely gave people what they wanted to see in that final section. But if I'm just going to judge the movie as a movie overall and not just that final portion, like I said, I thought the beginning part, like the first 2/3 of the movie, it definitely was not great filmmaking when it came to the story, the character storylines, just like all that kind of stuff. It's just like, the only thing it did have going was those monsters and that CG. So for the overall movie, that's just me judging as an overall movie, I'm going to give it a 6.5 out of 10. I think that being fair, that's what it deserves as a movie. But you definitely still check it out. I mean, if you want to see Godzilla versus Kong, it's going to give you sort of the fun stuff that you want to see. Movies like this, I imagine it's got to be super fun to be the director or just who's in charge of like the fights and stuff like that. Just because be able to sort of visualize and put this stuff onto the big screen, it just looks like so much fun, and just the visuals and everything behind it, just spectacular looking. So if you want to see some Godzilla versus Kong and the actual fully realized potential of Godzilla versus Kong, you will definitely get that in that final portion of the movie. You just have to go through a lot of movie, which is kind of like, But like I said, none of it is ever too bad, but you'll get what you want at the very end. So that'll do it for my thoughts on Godzilla vs. Kong. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you for watching.